The boardroom fell silent as I placed my designer briefcase on the polished mahogany table. 20 pairs of eyes followed my every move, but the only gaze that mattered was his, frozen in disbelief at the head of the table. 5 years ago, Marcus Taylor had walked out of our home with barely a goodbye, leaving nothing but shattered promises and crushing debt. Today, I walked into his company as the new CEO. The look on his face was worth every sleepless night, every tear shed, every moment of doubt. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice steady and clear. "For those who don't know me, my name is Elise Montgomery, and as of today, I'll be taking over as Chief Executive Officer." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I let my eyes linger on Marcus just long enough to see his jaw clench. He never believed I would amount to anything without him. He used to call my dreams cute little projects. Now I was standing in the position he had coveted for years. This wasn't just business. This was justice served cold, calculated, and utterly complete. But my journey to this moment didn't happen overnight. It began the day I discovered the truth about the man I had devoted my life to supporting. The invitation to Westridge Tech's annual gala sat on our kitchen counter like a taunting reminder of everything I wasn't allowed to be. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering, imagining what it would feel like to walk into that room as more than just Marcus Taylor's wife. After 8 years of marriage, I had perfected the role. Smile graciously, laugh at the right moments, and never, under any circumstances, mention my own abandoned career in finance. "Don't forget to pick up my tuxedo from the cleaners," Marcus called from upstairs, his voice echoing through our expansive but increasingly empty-feeling home. And, "Wear the blue dress, not the black one. The Hendersons will be there, and Diane Henderson wore black last year." I bit back a sigh. "I bought a new dress, actually. It's red." The footsteps stopped. Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression a mixture of annoyance and condescension. "Red? Elise, you know I'm presenting the new investment strategy. I need everyone focused on what I'm saying, not on my wife's attention-grabbing outfit." The way he said "my wife" made it sound like an accessory, something to be coordinated with his cufflinks or tie. I wanted to argue, to remind him that before I gave up my career to support his, I had been the one with the more promising future. Instead, I nodded and said, "I'll return it tomorrow." This was our pattern, his dismissal, my acquiescence. A dance we had performed for so long that the steps had become automatic. I had graduated top of my class from Wharton, had been on the fast track at Morgan Stanley before we married, but Marcus's career always took precedence. "We're a team," he would say. And right now, the best move for our team is to focus on my position at Westridge. Somehow, it was always the right time for his career, never for mine. As I prepared for the gala that evening, carefully applying makeup to mask my exhaustion, I thought about the woman I had once been. Ambitious, confident, the woman who had boldly presented investment strategies that had earned millions for her clients. Where had she gone? The woman in the mirror wore a navy blue dress. Appropriate, Marcus had called it, and the diamond earrings he had given me on our 5th anniversary. They felt heavy now, like tiny anchors tethering me to a life that was drifting further from my own desires with each passing day. "Ready?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled. This was the man who had swept me off my feet, who had promised we would build an empire together. Looking at him now, I realized the empire had always been meant for one ruler, not 2 partners. "Almost," I said, securing the clasp of my bracelet. "Marcus, I was thinking, now that the Westlake project is complete, maybe I could look into those financial analyst positions we talked about." His laugh was immediate, dismissive. Analyst positions? Elise, you've been out of the game for 8 years. You'd be competing against kids fresh out of business school. I was good at what I did, I reminded him, fighting to keep my voice steady. Better than good. And now you're good at this, he said, gesturing vaguely to encompass our home, our life. We have a system that works. Why mess with it? Because I'm disappearing, I wanted to say. Because each day I feel less like myself and more like a reflection of what you need me to be. Instead, I forced a smile and followed him downstairs. The Westridge Gala was held at the Bellamy Hotel, a neo-Gothic masterpiece in the heart of the financial district. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over the crowd of financial elite, everyone dressed in their finest, everyone playing their part in this carefully choreographed display of wealth and influence. I stood by Marcus's side as he worked the room, his arm around my waist more possessive than affectionate. I smiled. I nodded. I asked the right questions about summer homes and children's Ivy League prospects. I was performing flawlessly, as expected. "There's Victor," Marcus said suddenly, his grip on my waist tightening. Victor Chen, the CEO of Westridge, stood across the room in conversation with several board members. "I need to speak with him about my presentation. Wait here." Without waiting for my response, Marcus crossed the room, leaving me alone with my champagne flute and practiced smile. I watched as he joined Victor's circle, how easily he commanded attention, how confident he seemed. This was the man I had fallen in love with. Ambitious, charismatic, unstoppable. He's quite the operator, isn't he? I turned to find a woman beside me, elegant in a simple black dress, her gray-streaked hair swept into a sleek bun. I recognized her immediately, Elena Dimitrov, one of the few female executives at a rival firm. "Marcus knows what he wants," I replied diplomatically. Elena's smile was knowing. "And what do you want, Elise Taylor? Beyond standing in his shadow?" The question caught me off guard. No one at these events ever asked about me. Not really. I was Marcus's wife. Nothing more, nothing less. I began, but the words wouldn't come. What did I want? The answer had once been so clear to me. Elena didn't press. Instead, she handed me her business card. "If you ever want to talk about what exists beyond the shadow, call me." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving me clutching her card like a lifeline I didn't know I needed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and strategic introductions. Marcus's presentation on the new investment strategy was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from Victor Chen. I clapped along with everyone else, playing my part perfectly. It was past midnight when we arrived home, Marcus buoyant from his success, already loosening his bow tie as he strode through the door. "Victor loved the presentation," he said, pouring himself a celebratory scotch. "He's putting me forward for the CFO position when Reynolds retires next year." "That's wonderful," I said, slipping off my heels. "Congratulations." "This is what we've been working toward," Marcus continued, raising his glass in a toast. "First CFO, then CEO. Victor's already hinted that I'm next in line." The "we" caught in my throat. When had his ambitions become ours? When had I agreed to surrender my own dreams for the privilege of watching him achieve his? "I think I'm going to bed," I said, suddenly exhausted by more than just the late hour. Marcus barely noticed, already lost in plans for his ascension. I climbed the stairs alone, Elena Dimitrov's card burning a hole in my clutch. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. Marcus often left early for the office, especially after a networking event like the gala. I stretched, enjoying the rare moment of solitude, before remembering I needed to return the red dress, the one I had wanted to wear, the one that had been deemed too distracting. I made my way to Marcus's home office to retrieve my credit. Card from his desk where I'd left it the night before. His office was meticulously organized, everything in its place. A physical manifestation of his controlled, strategic mind. As I opened the top drawer, my eyes fell on a document I hadn't seen before. A bank statement, but not from our joint account. A private account, in Marcus's name only, with a balance that made my blood run cold. Where had this money come from? And more importantly, why didn't I know about it? My hands trembling, I continued searching. Behind a stack of folders, I found more statements, more secrets. Credit cards I didn't know existed, charged with expenses I couldn't explain. Dinners at restaurants we had never visited together. Hotel. Charges in cities he claimed to have never visited. And then, most damning of all, a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond bracelet, far more expensive than anything he had ever given me, with a note that simply read, "For my Audrey, the only one who truly understands me." The room seemed to spin. Audrey. The name was familiar. Audrey Winters, the new legal counsel at Westridge. Young, brilliant, ambitious, everything I had once been. I sat at his desk for what felt like hours. The evidence of his betrayal spread before me like the pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to see. It wasn't just the affair. It was the deliberate deception, the systematic way he had compartmentalized his life, keeping me in a box labeled wife while pursuing not just another woman, but another life entirely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone rang, breaking the silence. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, not trusting myself to speak. The phone rang again immediately. This time, I answered. "I've been calling the house phone," he said without preamble. "Why aren't you answering?" "I was busy," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "I need you to bring my blue folder to the office, the one on my desk. I have a meeting with Victor in an hour." The blue folder sat inches from the seat, evidence of his betrayal. I placed my hand on it, feeling the weight of the decision before me. "Elise, are you listening? The blue folder, now." "I can't," I said simply. "What do you mean, you can't? This is important, Elise. This could secure the CFO position." "I found the bank statements, Marcus." The words hung in the air between us. "And the credit card bills? And the bracelet for Audrey." The silence that followed was deafening. "We need to talk about this at home," he finally said, his voice tightly controlled. "Not over the phone." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied. "It's all very clear." "Elise, you're overreacting. This isn't what you think." "Isn't it?" 8 years, Marcus. 8 years I've put my life on hold for you. And all this time you've been— "This is exactly why we need to talk in person," he interrupted. "You're getting emotional. We need to be rational about this." Rational. It was his favorite word when dismissing my feelings. "Stay rational, Elise. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment, Elise." "I'll be home in an hour," he said. "Don't do anything rash." The call ended, and I sat in the sudden silence of his betrayal. Don't do anything rash. As if discovering your husband's infidelity and financial deception was something to be handled with calm deliberation. I looked around the office, seeing it with new eyes. The awards on the wall. The photographs of Marcus shaking hands with influential figures. Not a single photo of us together. It was a shrine to his ambition, with no room for partnership or shared dreams. Almost without conscious thought, I found myself dialing the number on Elena Dimitrov's card. "Elena Dimitrov," she answered on the second ring. "This is Elise Taylor," I said, surprising myself with the clarity of my purpose. "We met at the Westridge Gala last night." You asked me what I want beyond standing in Marcus's shadow. I remember, she replied, her voice warm. I'm ready to tell you the answer, I said. I want my life back. By the time Marcus's key turned, in the lock an hour later, I had moved past shock into a cold, clear state of resolve. I sat at the kitchen counter, the evidence of his deception neatly arranged before me. He entered looking immaculate as always, not a hair out of place, his expression carefully neutral. Elise, we need to discuss this rationally. Let's start with the rational explanation for the secret bank account, I said, gesturing to the statements. Or perhaps the rational explanation for the bracelet for your colleague. Marcus sighed, loosening his tie as if preparing for an unpleasant but necessary business negotiation. The account is for investments I didn't want to burden you with. High-risk ventures. And Audrey. That's a professional relationship that may have crossed certain boundaries, but it's not what you're thinking. Not what I'm thinking, I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. And what exactly am I thinking, Marcus? You're thinking I've betrayed you, he said, his voice softening as he took the seat across from me. But everything I've done, everything, has been to secure our future. The risks I've taken, the connections I've made. It's all been for us. There is no us, I said quietly. There's you and your ambitions, and then there's me, the prop you wheel out when it's convenient. His expression hardened. That's not fair. I've provided for you, given you a beautiful home, financial security, while systematically ensuring I remain dependent on you, I interrupted, discouraging me from returning to work, isolating me from my professional contacts, making every decision without my input. That's not partnership, Marcus. That's control. This is absurd, he said, standing abruptly. You're twisting everything. I've supported you in every way that matters, except the ways that would allow me to stand on my own. Marcus ran, a hand through his perfect hair, a rare display of frustration. I don't have time for this melodrama. I have real responsibilities, a career that demands my attention. When you've calmed down, when you're ready to be rational, we can discuss this like adults. The dismissal was so familiar, so expected, that it almost made me laugh. Almost. There's nothing to discuss, I said, rising to meet his gaze. I want a divorce. The word hung between us, heavy with finality. Marcus's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. A divorce? And then what? You'll go back to a career you've been absent from for nearly a decade? Start over at entry level at 40? Be realistic, Elise. Each word was designed to wound, to remind me of my dependence, my irrelevance in the world he believed belonged exclusively to people like him. I'd rather start over than continue living this lie, I said. His expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. Fine. If that's what you want, we'll divorce. But remember that everything, this house, our accounts, even your car, is in my name. The prenup you signed limits what you're entitled to. You'll be left with nothing. The threat should have terrified me. A month ago, even a day ago, it would have. But something had changed. The woman who had allowed herself to be diminished was gone, replaced by someone who recognized the value of her own strength. I'll take my chances, I said. Marcus studied me, perhaps seeing for the first time the woman who had existed before. She became his wife. You'll regret this, he said finally. When you're struggling to pay rent on some dismal apartment, when you're begging for entry-level positions, you'll remember what you threw away. No, I replied with a certainty that surprised even me. I won't. He left that night taking nothing but a suitcase of clothes and the blue folder I had refused to bring him. The house, once a showcase for our supposed success, felt cavernous in his absence. I moved through the rooms like a stranger, seeing each expensive furnishing, each carefully chosen artwork through new eyes. None of it had ever really been mine. It had all been part of the Marcus Taylor brand, a life built on appearances and ambition. In the days that followed, I discovered just how thoroughly Marcus had ensured my dependence. The house was indeed in his name alone. Our joint accounts had been drained. The credit cards were suddenly declined. Even the car I drove had been leased under his company's name. True to his word, he was leaving me with nothing. Except that wasn't quite true. I still had the one thing Marcus had never been able to touch: my mind. The same mind that had once devised financial strategies worth millions. The same mind that had graduated top of my class at Wharton. The mind that, even after 8 years of calculated suppression, remained sharp and hungry for challenge. As I sat in what had been our home, surrounded by the trappings of a life that was rapidly being dismantled, I thought of Elena Dimitrov's question, "What do you want beyond standing in his shadow?" The answer came with crystal clarity. I wanted to build something of my own, something that couldn't be taken away, something that would remind the world, and Marcus Taylor, that I had never been just his wife. I picked up my phone and dialed Elena's number again. When she answered, I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You once asked me what I want," I said. "I want to return to finance. I want to rebuild my career. And I want to do it in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to ignore what I'm capable of." Elena's laugh was warm, approving. "Now that," she said, "sounds like a plan I can help with." Little did Marcus know, as he emptied our accounts and canceled our credit cards, that he was setting in motion a chain of events that would lead me directly to the CEO chair he coveted. His attempt to leave me with nothing but debt would be his greatest miscalculation. Because when you strip someone of everything external, you leave them with the one thing that truly matters: an unshakable determination to reclaim their power, their purpose, and ultimately, their revenge. The question hung in the air between us, laden with implications beyond the professional realm. Victor's eyes held mine, searching for the truth beneath my carefully composed expression. "My commitment is to the integrity of the partnership," I replied finally. "Leadership changes, while significant, wouldn't alter that fundamental commitment." Victor nodded, seeming satisfied with my diplomatic response. "Good to know. We'll speak more once the board has been briefed." As I left his office that evening, the weight of what I had set in motion settled fully upon me. The security framework, initially conceived as a response to a data breach, had evolved into something far more consequential, a mechanism that had revealed deeper systemic issues and potentially altered the trajectory of multiple organizations, including Westridge. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had once dismissed my professional capabilities, relegating me to the role of supportive wife rather than equal partner. Now, those same capabilities had uncovered the flaws in his leadership, the ethical compromises he had made in pursuit of the success he had prioritized above all else, including our marriage. The following morning, I received a message from James Harrington requesting an urgent meeting. We arranged to meet for coffee at a quiet cafe midway between our offices. "The situation at Westridge is accelerating," he said without preamble, as he settled into the seat across from me. "Word has reached Suncrest's board about potential leadership turmoil. They're particularly interested in how it might affect the three-way partnership you've helped establish." I sipped my coffee, considering my response carefully. The partnership is structurally sound. It was designed to withstand individual personnel changes. James smiled slightly. Always the diplomat. But we both know that partnerships of this nature are built on relationships as much as contracts. If Marcus is removed from his position, which seems increasingly likely based on what I'm hearing, it creates both disruption and opportunity. What kind of opportunity are you suggesting? Suncrest has been monitoring the partnership closely, seeing it as a potential model. for their own strategic alliances. They're impressed with the security framework you've developed, particularly its emphasis on governance and transparency. James leaned forward slightly. They're prepared to move forward with a formal offer for the Chief Strategy Officer position, with one significant modification to the original scope. I raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. They want you to consider a dual role, CSO of Suncrest and board representative to the Horizon Artemis Westridge partnership. Essentially, serving as Suncrest's eyes and ears as they consider potential investment or alliance opportunities. The proposal was unexpected but intriguing, a position that would allow me to maintain involvement with the partnership I had helped shape while advancing to a more senior role at a larger, more influential institution. It's an interesting proposition, I acknowledged, though the timing is sensitive given the current situation at Westridge. Actually, the timing is precisely what makes this compelling, James countered. If leadership changes are imminent at Westridge, having someone with your unique understanding of both the partnership dynamics and Westridge's internal challenges would be invaluable to Suncrest as they consider their positioning. I understood. The subtext. Suncrest was potentially circling Westridge, seeing vulnerability and opportunity in the emerging governance issues. They wanted me not just for my strategic capabilities, but for my insider knowledge of a potential acquisition target. I'd need to consider the ethical implications carefully, I said, unwilling to commit without full reflection. There are complex boundaries between my knowledge of Westridge through the partnership and what would be appropriate to leverage in a new role. James nodded respectfully. Of course, integrity is precisely why Suncrest is interested. They're not looking for corporate espionage. They're looking for principled strategic guidance from someone who understands the landscape intimately. We parted with an agreement that I would consider the offer and respond within the week. As I returned to my office at Horizon, my thoughts were filled with the complex ethical and professional considerations the opportunity presented. That evening, as I was working late finalizing implementation details for the security framework, my office phone rang. The caller ID showed a Westridge number, but not one I recognized. Elise Montgomery, I answered, keeping my tone professionally neutral. Ms. Montgomery, this is Lawrence Baxter, chairman of Westridge's board of directors. The voice was deep, authoritative, and unfamiliar. I apologize for calling after hours, but I was hoping we might arrange a meeting to discuss some aspects of the security implementation report you provided to Victor Chen. The request sent a ripple of anticipation through me. Lawrence Baxter rarely involved himself directly in operational matters, delegating such responsibilities to the CEO and executive team. His direct outreach signaled the seriousness with which the board was taking the findings in my report. Of course, Mr. Baxter, I'm available at your convenience. Tomorrow morning, 7:30 at the University Club, a private breakfast. Would that work for your schedule? Yes, that would be fine. Good. And Ms. Montgomery, I'd appreciate your discretion regarding this meeting. Certain sensitive governance matters are best discussed without broader awareness until appropriate determinations have been made. The implication was clear. This wasn't a routine discussion about security implementation. This was about Marcus and the implications of what my report had revealed. I understand completely, I assured him. The University Club was old world, elegance distilled into architecture, dark wood paneling, leather chairs, discreet staff moving with practiced efficiency. Lawrence Baxter was already seated in a private dining alcove when I arrived. A man in his early 60s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to wielding significant authority. Ms. Montgomery, thank you for making time on such short notice, he said, rising briefly as I approached. I've ordered coffee. Please feel free to request breakfast as well. I settled across from him, accepting coffee but declining food. The formality of the setting and his demeanor suggested this was not a conversation to be conducted over Eggs Benedict. "I've reviewed your security implementation report in detail," he began once we were alone again, "particularly the appendices regarding data integrity concerns in our Asia-Pacific operations. Your analysis is remarkably thorough, especially given the technical complexity of the systems involved." "Thank you. The framework was designed to identify patterns that might indicate structural vulnerabilities. The Asia-Pacific findings emerged as part of that systematic assessment." Baxter nodded, studying me carefully. "Yet the specificity of certain observations suggests more than routine system analysis. You identified temporal correlations between accounting adjustments and board reporting cycles that would require significant contextual understanding of our governance processes." It was a subtle challenge, a suggestion that I had been looking for problems in specific areas rather than conducting an objective system-wide assessment. "The framework incorporates temporal analysis as a standard feature," I explained. "It's designed to identify any statistically significant correlations between data modifications and external events or deadlines. The board reporting cycle correlation emerged algorithmically, not through targeted investigation." Baxter seemed satisfied with this explanation. "I see. Well, regardless of methodology, the findings are deeply concerning. The board has initiated a comprehensive audit of the Asia-Pacific division, with particular focus on the reporting discrepancies you identified." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "What I'm about to share is highly confidential, Ms. Montgomery. The preliminary audit results confirm your findings and suggest that the issues may be more extensive than initially indicated. Most troublingly, there is evidence that our CFO was aware of these issues well before they came to the board's attention. Though I had already known this from my own investigation, I maintained an appropriately concerned but professional expression. That would represent a significant governance concern." "Indeed." Baxter's expression was grave. "The board is now faced with difficult decisions regarding executive accountability, which brings me to the purpose of this meeting." He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering though we were already in a private space. "Given your unique position, your understanding of our systems through the security framework implementation, your financial expertise, and your familiarity with our organizational culture, the board would value your perspective on potential leadership transitions that may become necessary." The request was unexpected and fraught with complex implications. He was essentially asking me to consult on decisions that would directly impact Marcus's future at Westridge, a situation that stretched the boundaries of professional ethics given our personal history. "I appreciate your confidence, Mr. Baxter, but I must acknowledge a potential conflict of interest. As you may be aware, Marcus Taylor and I were previously married. While our relationship is now strictly professional, any input I might provide regarding his position could be perceived as influenced by personal history." Baxter's smile suggested this was not news to him. "I'm well aware of your history with Mr. Taylor. In fact, it's part of why your perspective could be valuable. You understand not just his professional capabilities but his judgment patterns in ways others might not. However, I respect your concern about ethical boundaries." He considered for a moment before continuing. "Perhaps I can reframe my request. Rather than commenting on Mr. Taylor specifically, would you be willing to provide insight on what leadership qualities would be most crucial for Westridge moving forward, particularly in addressing the governance and transparency issues that have emerged?" This reframing created space for me to offer substantive input without directly advocating for or against Marcus's continued employment, a more ethically defensible position. I could certainly provide thoughts on leadership attributes that would support system integrity and governance transparency, I agreed, though I would still want to disclose the potential conflict in any formal advisory capacity. Of course, transparent disclosure is precisely the kind of approach we're seeking to emphasize. Baxter seemed pleased with this resolution. The board meets next Thursday to consider these matters. Would you be available to join us for a portion of that meeting to share your perspective? Yes, I can make myself available. As our meeting concluded, Baxter had one final question. In your professional judgment, Ms. Montgomery, can the issues identified in the Asia-Pacific Division be effectively remediated without significant leadership changes? It was a loaded question, essentially asking whether I believed Marcus could remain in his position while addressing the problems his oversight had allowed to develop and persist. Effective remediation requires accountability, Mr. Baxter, I replied carefully. When systemic issues develop under specific leadership, restoring trust usually necessitates demonstrable change. The nature and extent of that change depends on the board's determination regarding responsibility and the message it wishes to send about organizational values. Baxter nodded thoughtfully. Well said. I look forward to your input at Thursday's meeting. As I left the university club, I felt the weight of the situation's complexity. The trajectory I had been on since discovering Marcus's betrayal had led to this inflection point, a moment where my professional actions could directly impact his career in ways that echoed how his decisions had once impacted mine. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, nor was the responsibility. Despite everything, I was determined to approach the board meeting with integrity, offering insights based on professional judgment rather than personal history. If Marcus's position at Westridge was to end, it would be because of his own actions, not because of my vendetta. The days leading up to the board meeting were filled with careful preparation. I reviewed all documentation related to the Asia-Pacific issues, consulted with security and governance experts to ensure my recommendations were sound, and prepared a presentation focusing on structural solutions rather than individual accountability. During this same period, I continued discussions with James Harrington regarding the Suncrest opportunity, weighing the professional advancement it represented against the complications of timing and potential conflicts of interest. The board is very eager to move forward, James emphasized during our most recent conversation. They see the Westridge situation as creating a limited window of opportunity for strategic positioning. I understand their eagerness, I replied, but my involvement with the Westridge board matter needs to be concluded with complete integrity before I can consider new opportunities. The timing is simply too sensitive. James respected this position, though his disappointment was evident. Just don't wait too long. Opportunities like this have their own timeline. The morning of the Westridge board meeting arrived with a sense of momentous significance. I dressed with particular care: a charcoal gray suit, subtle but elegant jewelry, a red silk blouse that conveyed confidence without ostentation. My appearance needed to reflect the seriousness with which I approached the responsibility I had been given. The Westridge boardroom was imposing, larger and more formal than the conference rooms where operational meetings were typically held. The board members were already seated when I was escorted in, 13 men and 2 women of varying ages, all projecting the gravitas of substantial corporate authority. Lawrence Baxter welcomed me, introducing me to the board as the architect of our new security framework and a key advisor on governance enhancement. He made no mention of my history with Marcus, though I suspected most, if not all, of the board members were aware of it. Marcus was noticeably absent from the meeting, an indication that his case was indeed being formally considered, as board discussions regarding executive performance typically excluded the individual under review. My presentation focused on forward-looking governance structures rather than past failures, emphasizing how properly designed oversight systems could prevent the kinds of issues that had emerged in the Asia-Pacific Division. The core challenge is not unique to Westridge, I explained, careful to frame the issues as systemic rather than individual. Many global organizations struggle with ensuring consistent governance across geographically dispersed operations. The security framework we've implemented provides tools for early detection, but cultural and leadership alignment is equally important. The board engaged thoughtfully with my presentation, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, resource requirements, and success metrics. I answered each query with precision and confidence, establishing myself as a knowledgeable, objective advisor, rather than someone with personal stakes in their decisions. As the discussion concluded, Baxter thanked me for my input and indicated that the board would now move into a closed session to address specific personnel matters. I gathered my materials, preparing to leave. Ms. Montgomery, one of the female board members, said as I was about to exit, "Your recommendations show remarkable insight into governance dynamics. Have you considered pursuing board positions yourself? Your perspective would be valuable in many corporate environments." The question caught me off guard. Board directorships were typically offered to those with C-suite experience, often later in their careers. I'm focused on operational leadership at present, but I appreciate your suggestion. It's certainly something to consider for the future. Baxter walked me to the door, his expression thoughtful. Thank you again for your contributions today. The board has significant decisions to make, and your insights have been invaluable in framing our considerations. Before I could respond, he added more quietly, "Whatever determinations are made regarding current leadership, Westridge will need to rebuild certain aspects of its executive function. Your name has been mentioned in those discussions, Ms. Montgomery. Not today, but in the near future, we may have more to talk about." The implication was startling. He was suggesting that I might be considered for an executive role at Westridge itself, potentially even the position Marcus currently held. It was a possibility I had never explicitly pursued, yet it represented the ultimate full-circle journey from discarded wife to successor. I maintained my professional composure, thanking him for his confidence without expressing either interest or hesitation. This was neither the time nor place for such considerations. As I left Westridge headquarters, my phone chimed with a message from Elena. "Heard you were at the mothership today. Call me when you're free." I waited until I was back in my own office at Horizon before returning her call. Elena answered immediately. "So, you've been advising the Westridge board on governance matters," she said without preamble. "Quite the evolution from Marcus Taylor's overlooked wife to corporate governance. Guru." Word travels fast, I observed, unsurprised by her network's efficiency. Though guru is an overstatement. I was simply providing context for findings from the security implementation. Modest, as always, but my sources tell me your presentation was impressive enough that certain board members are floating your name for more permanent involvement with Westridge, possibly even as CFO if Marcus is shown the door, which seems increasingly likely. The confirmation of what Baxter had hinted at sent a ripple of complex emotions through me. That would be complicated, to say the least. Complicated but deliciously ironic, Elena replied, amusement in her voice. The wife he discarded returning as his professional replacement. You couldn't script a better corporate revenge story. I frowned slightly at her framing. If I were to consider any role at Westridge, and that's a significant if, it would be based on professional qualifications and strategic fit, not personal history. Of course, Elena agreed, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely believe me, though you must admit there would be a certain satisfaction in completing that particular circle. Before I could respond, she continued with new information. In any case, decisions may be accelerating. I've heard the board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. The preliminary audit results from Asia Pacific are apparently worse than initially reported. There's talk of regulatory disclosure requirements. This was significant development. Once regulatory disclosures became necessary, the issues moved from internal governance concerns to potential legal matters. Marcus's position would become even more precarious. Thank you for the update, I said, processing the implications. I should probably prepare for potential fallout affecting the partnership agreements. Always the strategic thinker, Elena observed. But Elise, whatever happens, you've earned this moment. Remember that. After we ended the call, I sat in my office considering the rapidly evolving situation and my place within it. The potential for a role at Westridge presented both professional opportunity and emotional complexity. Could I effectively lead within an organization where my history with its current CFO was known? Would accepting such a position be perceived as personally motivated rather than professionally appropriate? These questions were still occupying my thoughts when David Chen, Horizon's CEO, appeared in my doorway. I just got off the phone with Victor, he said, his expression serious. There are major developments at Westridge. We need to discuss potential implications for our partnership. I gestured him in, closing my office door behind him. What kind of developments? The audit of their Asia-Pacific division has uncovered material misstatements that will require public disclosure and financial restatements. The board is meeting tomorrow to determine executive accountability. David sat across from me, his brow furrowed. Victor believes Marcus will be asked to resign. He also mentioned that you've been advising their board on governance reforms. I nodded, confirming this without elaboration. Victor also shared something else, that your name is being discussed as a potential candidate for the CFO position, if it becomes vacant. David studied me carefully. Is that something you're pursuing? No, I've not pursued it, I replied truthfully. The possibility was mentioned to me today for the first time, but in very preliminary terms. I've made no decisions or expressions of interest. David nodded slowly. If you were to consider such a role, it would obviously impact your position here at Horizon. It would also create an interesting dynamic within our partnership structure. You would effectively move from one partner organization to another. I understand the complexities, I assured him. Any decision would take into account my responsibilities to Horizon and the integrity of the partnership we've built. For what it's worth, David said after a moment's consideration, I think you would excel in such a role, though professionally, I'd hate to lose you from our team. His support was meaningful, validation of the professional reputation I had rebuilt over the past 2 years. Thank you, David. That means a great deal coming from you. The following day brought the news that had been increasingly inevitable. Marcus Taylor had been asked to resign as CFO of Westridge, effective immediately. The company issued a press release citing inconsistencies in financial reporting processes in their Asia-Pacific division and the need for new leadership to strengthen governance protocols. The financial markets responded with predictable concern, Westridge's stock dropping nearly 8% by mid-morning, as analysts speculated about the extent of the reporting issues and potential regulatory implications. By afternoon, the story had evolved to include speculation about succession, with several financial news outlets mentioning my name among potential candidates for the now vacant CFO position. One particularly detailed analysis noted the intriguing potential appointment of Elise Montgomery, ex-wife of the departing CFO and architect of the security framework, that reportedly identified the governance issues leading to today's resignation. My phone was buzzing constantly with messages, colleagues seeking confirmation, journalists requesting comments, financial analysts probing for insights. I responded to none of them, maintaining professional distance from the speculation while consulting with Horizon's corporate communications team on an appropriate statement regarding the partnership's stability, despite Westridge's leadership changes. Late that afternoon, Lawrence Baxter called, requesting another meeting, this time at Westridge headquarters rather than the University Club. The board has made its determinations regarding current leadership, he explained. Now, we need to discuss future leadership. Your name features prominently in those discussions, Ms. Montgomery. I agreed to meet him the following morning, using the intervening time to carefully consider my position. The opportunity was undeniably significant. A C-suite role at a major financial institution, a platform from which to implement the governance principles I had advocated, a definitive statement about my professional capabilities. Yet the personal dimensions couldn't be ignored. Taking Marcus's former position would inevitably be viewed through the lens of our history, potentially undermining my authority or casting professional decisions in a personal light. I also needed to consider the competing opportunity at Suncrest. A role without the personal complications, but perhaps with less immediate impact or visibility. That evening, as I was weighing these considerations in my apartment, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I checked the security monitor, I was stunned to see Marcus standing in the hallway. For a moment, I considered not answering. Our paths had crossed only in professional contexts since the divorce. He had never come to my personal residence, but curiosity and a certain sense of inevitability led me to open the door. "Marcus," I said, my tone neutral. "This is unexpected." He looked different than he had in our recent professional encounters, less polished, more human. The strain of the day's events was evident in the slight dishevelment of his normally perfect appearance. "I know," he replied, his voice subdued. "I probably shouldn't be here, but given what's happened and what might happen next, I felt we should talk. Person to person, not through press releases or board meetings." After a moment's hesitation, I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. My apartment was the antithesis of the home we had once shared. Contemporary where that had been traditional, minimal where that had been ornate, entirely reflective of my aesthetic rather than a compromise or submission. Marcus glanced around, taking in the space that represented my reclaimed independence. "Nice place," he said, the comment awkward in its banality given the circumstances. "Thank you. Would you like to sit?" I gestured toward the living area, maintaining the formal politeness of distant acquaintances. We settled on opposite ends of my sofa, the space between us filled with unspoken history and the weight of the day's events. "I assume you've heard," he said finally. "Yes, it's been widely reported." Marcus nodded, his expression a mixture of resignation and lingering. Disbelief. The board made its decision before the meeting even started. The audit findings left them little choice, from a governance perspective. The issues were significant, I acknowledged, neither accusatory nor sympathetic. "Yes." He ran a hand. Through his hair, a gesture of fatigue I remembered from our marriage. Though the public narrative doesn't capture the full complexity, the reporting discrepancies began before my oversight, though I take responsibility for not addressing them, more aggressively when they were identified. I didn't respond, waiting for him to continue, to explain why he had come. "I know your security framework was what ultimately brought these issues to light," he said after a moment. "And I know you've been advising the board on governance reforms." Again, I remained silent, unwilling to defend or explain my professional actions. "I'm not here to accuse you of orchestrating my downfall, Elise," Marcus continued, correctly interpreting my guarded response. "Whatever our personal history, I recognize that the framework was legitimate, the findings were real, and the board's decision was justified." This admission surprised me. It represented a level of self-awareness I hadn't observed in him before. "Then why are you here?" I asked finally. Marcus met my gaze directly. "Because I've heard that the board is considering you as my replacement. And before that possibility advances further, I wanted to clear the air between us." The directness of his statement was startling. "I haven't been offered the position," I said carefully. "Though yes, there have been preliminary discussions." "You would be good at it," he said, the acknowledgement clearly difficult for him. "Better than I was in some respects. You always had a more natural inclination toward risk management and governance controls." Coming from Marcus, who had once dismissed my professional capabilities so completely, this recognition was both validating and disorienting. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, genuinely curious about his motivations. He was quiet, for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. Because despite everything that happened between us, the betrayal, the divorce, the professional competition, I find myself wanting to make amends in whatever way I can. Not to repair what can't be repaired, but to acknowledge truths I should have recognized long ago. What truths? That I underestimated you, that I prioritized my ambitions over our partnership, that I treated your career as secondary when your capabilities were equal to or greater than mine. He paused, the admission clearly difficult. That I lost more than I gained through the choices I made. The acknowledgement I had once desperately wanted now arrived when I no longer needed it for validation. Yet it still carried weight, not as redemption for our relationship, but as recognition of a reality that had shaped both our trajectories. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his expression growing more serious. "If you do take the position, and I suspect the board will offer it to you, there are things you should know about the internal dynamics, the political landscape, the unwritten rules that govern Westridge at the executive level. Are you offering to help me succeed in the role you just lost?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "I'm offering information that might be useful, regardless of how you choose to use it," he clarified. "Not out of altruism, but because after everything that's happened, providing this context feels like the right thing to do." Over the next hour, Marcus shared detailed insights about Westridge's board dynamics, the alliance structures within the executive team, the historical tensions between divisions, and the unwritten expectations that had developed within the Yasai organization's culture. It was valuable information, the kind not captured in organizational charts or governance documents, but crucial for navigating the complex human ecosystem of a major financial institution. As he prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the door. "Whatever you decide about the position, Elise, approach it as your opportunity, not as my replacement. The best revenge, if that's even what you want anymore, isn't taking my position. It's defining it so completely in your terms that any comparison becomes irrelevant." After he left, I stood in my apartment considering the strange, full-circle journey that had brought us to this moment. From wife to ex-wife to potential successor, from dismissed talent to recognized expert, from dependent to independently powerful. The next morning, as I prepared for my meeting with Lawrence Baxter and the Westridge board, I realized that the decision before me wasn't about Marcus at all, neither replacing him nor vindicating myself against him. It was about the opportunity to lead at a higher level, to implement the principles I believed in, to continue the professional journey I had recommenced when our marriage ended. Whatever choice I made would be based on that understanding, that my path forward was defined not by what had happened to me, but by what I chose to create from those circumstances. The Westridge boardroom felt different this morning. The atmosphere charged with anticipation rather than the somber gravity of yesterday's executive dismissal. Lawrence Baxter greeted me with unexpected warmth, introducing me to several board members I hadn't met during my previous presentation. "Thank you for joining us again so quickly, Ms. Montgomery," he said, gesturing toward a seat near the head of the table, a position of prominence that didn't escape my notice. "Recent events have accelerated certain discussions we had only begun to consider." The full board was present, along with Victor Chen and two individuals I didn't recognize, who were introduced as external consultants specializing in executive transitions. The configuration suggested this was more than an exploratory conversation. It had the hallmarks of a formal interview. "As you're aware," Baxter began once everyone was settled, "Westridge is facing significant challenges following yesterday's leadership change. The CFO position requires immediate attention, particularly given the ongoing audit of our Asia-Pacific operations and the governance reforms catalyzed by your security framework." He paused, his gaze direct and evaluative. "Your name has emerged as a compelling candidate for this role, Ms. Montgomery. Your financial expertise, your intimate understanding of our systems through the partnership work, and your demonstrated commitment to governance, integrity all align with the qualities we're seeking in our next CFO. The directness of the approach was surprising. I had expected a more gradual exploration rather than an immediate positioning of me as a leading candidate. "I appreciate your confidence," I replied carefully, "though I imagine there are considerations beyond technical qualifications given my prior connection to the organization." Victor Chen spoke up, addressing the elephant in the room with characteristic directness. "You're referring to your past marriage to Marcus Taylor. The board is fully aware of that history and has discussed it extensively. Our conclusion is that your professional capabilities and demonstrated judgment outweigh any concerns about perceived conflicts or appearances." One of the female board members nodded in agreement. "In fact, your handling of the security framework, implementation, maintaining professional objectivity despite potential personal motivations, speaks to your integrity. That's a quality we particularly value given current circumstances." The validation was meaningful, though I maintained my composed exterior. "Thank you. I've worked to ensure that professional responsibilities remain separate from personal history." Baxter steered the conversation toward more specific aspects of the role: expectations regarding financial strategy, governance reforms, rebuilding trust with investors and regulators. The discussion had the structure and detail of a formal executive interview, with board members taking turns exploring different dimensions of my experience and approach. Throughout, I was conscious of striking the right balance, demonstrating confidence without arrogance, knowledge without rigidity, leadership without dominance. The CFO role at an institution like Westridge represented a significant leap from my current position at Horizon, and I needed to establish both capability and readiness. 2 hours into the meeting, Baxter shifted to more practical considerations. Assuming mutual interest in moving forward, there would be several logistical matters to address: your current role at Horizon, the partnership agreements between our organizations, compensation arrangements, and so forth. Before we delve into those details, do you have questions or considerations about the role itself? It was time for directness on my part as well. Yes, I'd like to understand the board's expectations regarding the Asia-Pacific situation. Would I be primarily tasked with cleanup and remediation, or would there be support for more fundamental restructuring of international operations? The question was substantive, but also strategic, testing whether they sought a caretaker to manage the crisis or a change agent empowered to implement deeper reforms. "An excellent question," Baxter replied, exchanging glances with several board members. "Our view is that the current situation presents an opportunity for meaningful transformation, not just remediation. We're seeking a CFO who will use this moment to reevaluate our international strategy holistically, with board support for substantive structural changes where warranted." It was the answer I had hoped for, an indication that the role would involve genuine leadership rather than merely managing a predetermined cleanup process. "Another question," I continued. "How does the board envision the relationship between the CFO position and the ongoing partnership with Horizon and Artemis? My involvement in establishing that framework creates potential complexities if I were to move from one partner organization to another." Victor Chen responded to this query. "We see your knowledge of the partnership as an asset, not a complication. The transition would require careful communication and perhaps some adjustment to governance protocols, but your unique understanding of all three organizations would ultimately strengthen rather than undermine the alliance." As the meeting proceeded, the nature of the conversation shifted from evaluative to persuasive. The board members increasingly focused on selling me on the opportunity rather than testing my suitability. It was a subtle but significant transition, indicating their growing commitment to my candidacy. By the meeting's conclusion, Baxter was discussing next steps with the presumption of mutual interest. "We'd like to move quickly given market sensitivities," and ongoing regulatory considerations. Could you provide your thoughts on the opportunity within the next 48 hours? Meanwhile, we'll prepare a formal offer outlining compensation, authority parameters, and transition timelines. The immediacy was both flattering and challenging. I can certainly provide preliminary thoughts within that time frame, I agreed. Though I would need to have appropriate conversations with Horizon's leadership before any formal decisions. Of course, Baxter nodded. We respect your professional obligations. Victor has already had preliminary discussions with David Chen regarding the possibility, so the concept won't come as a complete surprise. As the meeting concluded and I prepared to leave, Victor pulled me aside. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I believe you're exactly what Westridge needs at this juncture. Someone with both the technical capabilities and the moral compass to guide us through this transition. The board agrees, as you've no doubt gathered. His endorsement carried particular weight, given his long-standing mentorship of Marcus and his central role in Westridge's leadership structure. Thank you, Victor. That means a great deal coming from you. There's something else you should know, he added, his voice lowered further. Marcus came to see me yesterday after the board's decision. He specifically recommended you as his successor, cited your governance instincts and strategic thinking as qualities the organization needs. Given the circumstances, it was unexpected. The revelation stunned me, confirming what Marcus had implied during his visit to my apartment. But taking it a step further, he hadn't just accepted the possibility of my appointment, he had actively advocated for it. That is unexpected, I acknowledged, unsure how to process this information. Victor studied me with knowing eyes. People are complex, Elise. Even those who have hurt us can sometimes surprise us with moments of clarity or generosity. Something to consider as you weigh this opportunity. As I left Westridge headquarters, my mind was filled with competing considerations. The professional opportunity represented by the CFO position, the complex personal dimensions of replacing Marcus, the unresolved question of the Suncrest offer, and the implications for my current role at Horizon. Before addressing any of these, I needed to speak with David Chen. I owed him transparency about the Westridge discussions, particularly given his support for my career development at Horizon. David was in his office when I returned, reviewing quarterly performance reports. He looked up as I entered, his expression knowing. I'm guessing the Westridge meeting was more than a follow-up on governance recommendations. It was essentially a formal interview for the CFO position, I confirmed, settling into the chair across from him. They're preparing an offer, though I've made no commitments. David nodded, seeming unsurprised. Victor called me yesterday to discuss the possibility. I told him you'd be an exceptional choice, though selfishly, I'd prefer to keep you here at Horizon. His supportiveness was characteristic, but still meaningful. Thank you for that vote of confidence. I wanted to discuss this with you directly. Before making any decisions, my commitment to Horizon remains significant. I appreciate that, David replied. But this is a C-suite position at a major financial institution, the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often. I wouldn't expect you to refuse it out of loyalty to Horizon, especially given the unique circumstances. The unique circumstances reference acknowledged the personal dimension without directly mentioning Marcus, typical of David's tactful approach to sensitive matters. There's also the Suncrest opportunity to consider, I noted, committed to full transparency. They've expressed serious interest in the Chief Strategy Officer role. David leaned back, considering this new information. That's an impressive alternative, though different in scope and focus from the Westridge position. Very different, I agreed. Suncrest would mean building new strategic frameworks. Westridge would mean rehabilitating existing ones. Both have their appeal. And their challenges, David added thoughtfully. The Westridge role comes with immediate pressure, market scrutiny, regulatory attention, internal cultural issues. Suncrest would likely offer a cleaner slate, but perhaps less immediate impact. His assessment mirrored my own analysis. The Westridge position represented greater immediate visibility and influence, but also greater scrutiny and pressure. The Suncrest role might allow more methodical building without the weight of crisis management. If you decide to accept either position, David continued, we'll need to address your role in the partnership framework. You've been central to that structure, particularly the security implementation. I know. That's one of my main concerns about transitioning. The partnership is still evolving, and my departure could create instability. David considered this, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his desk. Not necessarily. If you move to Westridge, you'd still be part of the partnership, just from a different position. Your knowledge of all three organizations could actually strengthen the alliance. And we have capable people who could step into your role here at Horizon. His perspective was reassuring, a reminder that organizations are designed to withstand individual transitions, even when those individuals have played key roles. Take the time you need to consider both opportunities, David advised as our conversation concluded. But know that you have my support whatever you decide. You've earned these options through exceptional work, Elise. Don't let concerns about Horizon limit your considerations. With David's endorsement alleviating one set of concerns, I turned my attention to the Suncrest opportunity, arranging a call with James Harrington to discuss their timeline and expectations. The board was hoping for an answer this week, James explained when we connected. They're eager to move forward with their strategic realignment, and your role would be central to that process. I understand their urgency, I replied. But I've received another significant opportunity that requires careful consideration. I need a few more days before making a decision. James wasn't surprised by this development. Westridge has made a formal approach, I take it. The timing makes sense given yesterday's announcement. Yes, though I'd appreciate your discretion regarding that information. Of course, he assured me. For what it's worth, Elise, while Suncrest would certainly value your talents, the Westridge situation presents a unique opportunity given your history with the organization. There's a certain poetic justice in that trajectory. His comment echoed Elena's framing, the narrative appeal of the discarded wife returning as executive leadership. While I understood the dramatic satisfaction others found in this storyline, my own considerations were more complex and pragmatic. I'm evaluating both opportunities based on professional fit and growth potential, I said, gently redirecting from the personal narrative. Each presents distinct advantages and challenges. Naturally, James conceded. Just know that Suncrest is prepared to be competitive with any offer Westridge might extend. They view you as a transformative addition to their leadership team. The affirmation was gratifying. External validation of the professional value I had rebuilt since the divorce. Whatever decision I made would be from a position of choice rather than necessity, a stark contrast to the vulnerability I had experienced when Marcus walked away. That evening, I dedicated myself to systematic analysis of both opportunities, creating detailed comparison matrices, researching market perceptions of both organizations, evaluating growth trajectories and strategic challenges. The process was reminiscent of the financial analyses I had conducted early in my career, before my professional identity had been subsumed by my marriage. As midnight approached, I stepped away from the spreadsheets and documents, recognizing that the decision couldn't be made through quantitative analysis alone. There were intangible factors to consider: the emotional weight of returning to Westridge in a leadership capacity, the clean slate Suncrest represented, the different types of challenges each role would present. I poured a glass of wine and moved to my apartment's balcony, gazing out at the city lights while allowing my thoughts to settle. The path that had led to this moment, from abandoned wife to sought-after executive, had been neither linear nor predictable. Each step had built upon the last, creating a foundation of resilience and capability that now allowed me to choose between significant opportunities rather than simply accepting whatever was offered. The contrast with my position 2 years ago was stark. Then, I had been stripped of financial security, professional identity, and personal confidence, left with nothing but debt and determination. Now, I stood at a crossroads of opportunity, my capabilities recognized and valued, my future defined by choice rather than circumstance. The realization brought unexpected emotion, not triumph or vindication, but a quieter satisfaction, a recognition of the distance traveled and the strength discovered along the way. My contemplation was interrupted by a text message. Elena, with her characteristic timing. Decision made yet? The financial world awaits your next strategic move. I smiled at her dramatic phrasing but appreciated the check-in. Still weighing options. Both have merit. Her response came quickly. True, but only one completes the perfect revenge narrative. Just saying. Again, the focus on the personal storyline rather than the professional consideration. Life isn't a revenge narrative, I replied. It's more complex than that. Says the woman positioned to take her ex-husband's job, Elena countered. Some stories write themselves, Elise. I didn't respond further, returning my attention to the city view and my own reflections. Elena wasn't wrong about the narrative. Appeal. But leadership decisions needed to be based on more substantial foundations than personal history. The next morning brought the formal offer from Westridge, a comprehensive package detailing compensation structure, authority parameters, reporting relationships, and transition timelines. The terms were extremely favorable, reflecting both the urgency of their situation and the value they placed on my capabilities. Particularly noteworthy was the explicit authority granted over international operations remediation, not just addressing the immediate Asia-Pacific issues, but reimagining the governance structure for all international divisions. It was a mandate for transformation rather than mere stabilization, suggesting the board was sincere in its commitment to fundamental change. Within hours, Suncrest countered with their formal offer, comparable in compensation, but different in focus and scope. Where the Westridge position centered on financial leadership and governance reform, the Suncrest role emphasized strategic innovation and new market development. The decision crystallized as I compared the two documents side by side. Both represented exceptional opportunities, but they called for different strengths and would lead to different futures. The Westridge position would leverage my governance, expertise, and financial acumen in an immediate, high-visibility context. The Suncrest role would utilize my strategic thinking in a more developmental, forward-looking capacity. What ultimately tipped the balance wasn't the compensation or the title, but the nature of the challenge. The Westridge position offered the opportunity to transform an organization that I understood intimately, to address systemic issues that had personal as well as professional significance. It wasn't about replacing Marcus. It was about reshaping what he had helped build into something stronger, more transparent, more sustainable. With my decision made, I contacted Lawrence Baxter to schedule a meeting for the following morning. His response was immediate and enthusiastic, suggesting he anticipated my acceptance. I then called James Harrington to personally decline the Suncrest offer, expressing genuine appreciation for their interest while explaining my decision to pursue the opportunity at Westridge. I understand, James said, disappointment evident in his voice but tempered with respect. The symmetry of returning to Westridge in a leadership capacity is compelling, and the immediate impact you can have there given the current circumstances is significant. Thank you for understanding, I replied. The Suncrest opportunity was exceptional, and in different circumstances, my decision might have been different. Perhaps our paths will cross again in the future, James suggested. The financial world has a way of creating unexpected intersections. I would welcome that, I said sincerely, recognizing the value of maintaining this professional connection. My final call was to David Chen, informing him of my decision and discussing transition plans for my responsibilities at Horizon. His support remained unwavering, though tinged with the natural regret of losing a valued team member. "We'll miss your contributions," he said, "but this is the right move for your career, and maintaining our connection through the partnership will help ease the transition." We agreed on a 4-week handover period, allowing time to transition my projects and responsibilities while preparing for the new role at Westridge. It was a compressed timeline, but manageable given the urgency of Westridge's situation. The following morning, I met with Lawrence Baxter and the Westridge board to formally accept the CFO position. The meeting was brief, but significant, focused on immediate priorities and public announcement plans. "We'd like to announce your appointment tomorrow morning," Baxter explained. "The markets need reassurance about our leadership stability, particularly given ongoing concerns about the Asia-Pacific situation." I nodded, understanding the urgency. "I'm prepared for that timeline. I've already initiated transition discussions with Horizon." "Excellent. Our communications team has prepared a press release emphasizing your financial expertise and your role in developing the security framework that's now being implemented across all 3 partner organizations. We've been careful to focus on your professional qualifications rather than any personal connection to the previous CFO." The consideration was appropriate, though I suspected the financial press would make those connections regardless of what the official announcement emphasized. "There's one more matter to discuss," Victor Chen interjected. "Your title and scope of responsibility." I raised an eyebrow, curious about this last-minute consideration. "The board has been discussing an expanded role," Victor continued. "Given the interconnected nature of our financial and operational challenges, we're proposing that your position be designated as Chief Financial and Operations Officer, overseeing not just financial governance, but operational integrity across the organization." The expansion was significant, elevating the role beyond traditional CFO responsibilities to include direct authority over operational functions that would typically fall under different executive positions. "That's a substantial enlargement of the role," I noted, careful to understand the full implications. "What prompted this consideration?" Baxter exchanged glances with several board members before responding. "The security framework you developed revealed that our most significant vulnerabilities exist at the intersection of financial and operational systems. Addressing these effectively requires integrated oversight rather than siloed leadership. Your background uniquely qualifies you for this expanded scope." The explanation made sense from a governance perspective, though I recognize that such a significant expansion of authority might create tension with other executives who would now fall partially under my oversight. "I appreciate the board's confidence," I said, "though I want to ensure this structure sets both me and the organization up for success. Have other members of the executive team been consulted about this reconfiguration?" "We've had preliminary discussions with key leaders," Baxter assured me. "There's broad recognition that our current challenges require new approaches to organizational structure. Your external perspective is viewed as an asset in this regard, not a threat." With that clarification, I accepted the expanded role, recognizing both the opportunity and responsibility it represented. "I'll work to justify your confidence in this broader capacity." As the meeting concluded and announcement plans were finalized, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had led to this moment. 2 years ago, I had stood in an empty apartment, stripped of financial security and professional identity, determined to rebuild but uncertain of the path forward. Now I was preparing to assume expanded C-suite responsibilities at one of the country's leading financial institutions. The transformation wasn't just professional, but personal. From defining myself in relation to Marcus to establishing an independent identity and reputation. From seeking validation to providing leadership. From reacting to circumstances to creating new possibilities. The announcement of my appointment the following morning generated precisely the media attention the board had anticipated. Financial. News outlets featured prominent coverage, most focusing on my professional background and the governance challenges facing Westridge, though several couldn't resist highlighting the personal connection to Marcus. Ex-wife of ousted Westridge CFO, named as successor with expanded authority, read one particularly direct headline, while another framed it more professionally. Security Framework Architect Montgomery to assume CFO role with expanded operational oversight. The market response was immediate and positive, Westridge stock recovering nearly 5% of its recent losses, as investors interpreted the appointment as a signal of serious commitment to governance reform and operational integrity. Industry analysts issued generally favorable assessments, noting my background in financial strategy and security implementation, while acknowledging the unusual circumstances of my appointment. One prominent analyst observed that the board's decision to expand the role's authority suggested confidence in Montgomery's capacity to address systemic issues that transcend traditional financial oversight. Throughout the day, my phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from colleagues, former classmates, industry peers, each representing a thread in the professional network I had carefully rebuilt since the divorce. The external validation was gratifying but secondary to my own sense of having come full circle, returning to the institution where I had once been merely Marcus Taylor's wife as a leader in my own right. Among the messages was a brief text from Marcus himself. "Congratulations. They made the right choice. The expanded authority is a strong vote of confidence. Use it wisely." The absence of bitterness or resentment in his message was noteworthy. Further evidence of the strange evolution in our relationship, from spouses to adversaries to something more complex and mature. Elena's message arrived late in the day. "CFO, they gave you even more authority than he had. Perfect execution of the longest game. Drinks soon to celebrate?" I smiled at her framing, replying simply, "Not a game, but yes to drinks. Much to discuss." The final week at Horizon was a whirlwind of transition activities, documenting processes, transferring project oversight, briefing team members who would assume my responsibilities. David arranged a farewell gathering where the genuine warmth and appreciation of colleagues reinforced how successfully I had rebuilt professional relationships during my time there. "You've left an indelible mark on Horizon," David said during his brief remarks. "The security framework you developed will protect not just our systems, but our reputation for years to come. And though you're moving to a partner organization, your influence here will continue through the structures and processes you've established." The acknowledgement was meaningful, validation that my contributions had transcended day-to-day responsibilities to create lasting impact. It represented the kind of professional legacy I had once feared would never be possible after years away from formal financial roles. On my final day at Horizon, as I packed the personal items from my office, David stopped by with an unexpected gift: a framed copy of the partnership agreement between Horizon, Artemis, and Westridge, signed by all three CEOs. "A reminder of what you helped build," he said, "and a symbol of connections that transcend organizational boundaries." The gesture was thoughtful and significant. Recognition that my professional journey had never been solely about individual achievement, but about creating sustainable relationships and structures. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved. "This partnership has been central to my professional reclamation. I'm grateful for the opportunity you gave me when others might have seen only the gap in my resume." "I saw capability and determination," David replied simply. "The same qualities that led to today's transition. Westridge is fortunate to have you, Elise." As I left Horizon's offices for the final time, carrying the framed agreement and a box of personal items, I felt a sense of completion rather than departure. My time there had served its purpose, providing the platform for professional rebuilding. the opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that had been dormant but not diminished during my marriage. The weekend before starting at Westridge, I allowed myself a rare moment of celebration: dinner at an exclusive restaurant with Elena, who insisted on marking the occasion appropriately. "To the most impressive career resurrection I've witnessed in 20 years of financial services," she said, raising her champagne glass. "From discarded wife to C-suite executive in 2 years. Remarkable by any standard." "It wasn't about resurrection," I corrected gently. "It was about reclamation, reconnecting with capabilities that were always there, just subordinated to other priorities for a time." Elena smiled knowingly. Ever the diplomat. But we both know there's a certain satisfaction in this particular outcome. Taking over his role, with expanded authority no less, after he left you with nothing but debt? That's the kind of symmetry even Greek tragedians would appreciate. I considered her framing, acknowledging the narrative appeal while recognizing its limitations. "There is a certain closure in returning to Westridge in a leadership capacity," I conceded. "But the satisfaction comes from the recognition of my capabilities, not from replacing Marcus specifically." "Fair enough." Elena nodded, though I suspect he sees it differently. "How has he responded to your appointment?" "With unexpected grace, actually. He even recommended me to the board, according to Victor." Elena's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Now that is an interesting development. Perhaps he's grown as well through this experience." "Perhaps," I agreed. "People are more complex than the roles we assign them in our personal narratives." As our dinner continued, the conversation shifted from my appointment to broader industry trends and Elena's own career developments. It was a welcome change of focus, a reminder that my professional identity extended beyond the Marcus-related narrative that had dominated recent discussions. Monday morning arrived with a sense of momentous transition. I dressed with particular care: a charcoal gray suit, subtle jewelry, and a red silk blouse that conveyed confident authority without ostentation. The parallel to what I had worn for the Westridge board presentation was intentional. A visual callback to the moment that had initiated this professional evolution. The morning news cycle included fresh coverage of my appointment, timed to my official start date. Most reports were appropriately professional, focusing on the governance challenges I would be addressing and the expanded scope of the CFOO role. A few financial commentators noted that my appointment represented a significant shift for Westridge, which had historically promoted from within rather than bringing in external leadership for C-suite positions. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave for my first day, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, poised, confident, ready for the challenges ahead. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the shattered individual who had discovered Marcus's betrayal 2 years earlier. That woman had been defined by what had been taken from her. This woman was defined by what she had built for herself. The journey from that moment to this one had been neither easy nor linear. It had required resilience, strategic thinking, occasional compromise, and constant adaptation. But it had led to something I couldn't have fully envisioned when I first called Elena after discovering Marcus's deception. Not just professional restoration, but genuine transformation, evolving beyond what I had been before into something stronger, more independent, more authentically aligned with my capabilities and values. With that recognition firmly in mind, I left my apartment and headed toward Westridge headquarters, ready to begin the next chapter of my professional journey. Not as Marcus Taylor's replacement, but as Elise Montgomery, Chief Financial and Operations Officer, architect of my own reclamation and author of my own future. Westridge headquarters loomed before me, its glass and steel exterior gleaming in the morning sunlight. I had visited this building countless times during my marriage to Marcus, attending corporate functions on his arm, playing the role of supportive wife, always peripheral to the real action. Now I approached as Chief Financial and Operations Officer, a position of authority that exceeded even what Marcus had held. The security guard recognized me as I entered, offering a respectful, "Good morning, Ms. Montgomery," as he processed my new executive credentials. The difference was subtle but significant, acknowledgement of my professional identity rather than my marital status. Victor Chen was waiting in the lobby, a gesture of respect that acknowledged the significance of this transition. "Ready for day one?" he asked, extending his hand. "Absolutely," I replied, my confidence genuine rather than performed. The months of preparation, developing the security framework, analyzing Westridge's operations, understanding its cultural dynamics, had given me a deep understanding of the challenges I would face. "The executive team is gathered in the conference room," Victor explained as we walked toward the elevators. "I thought a direct introduction would be the most efficient way to establish your authority from the outset." The directness was appreciated. While my appointment had been communicated throughout the organization, this immediate convening of senior leadership would set the tone for my tenure. "Thank you. Clear communication will be essential, particularly given the expanded scope of the role." As we rode the elevator to the executive floor, Victor offered an unexpected observation. "You know, I remember the first time you came to this building, Marcus's first holiday party after joining Westridge. You were quieter then, observing everything but saying little." The memory was accurate if surprising in its detail. "Different circumstances," I replied simply. "Very different," Victor agreed, though I noticed even then how carefully you analyzed the room, the relationships, the unspoken dynamics. You were learning, not just accompanying. His perception was sharper than I had realized. "I've always been observant," I acknowledged, though back then I wasn't applying those observations professionally. "And now you are." Victor nodded as the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, which is precisely what Westridge needs at this juncture. The executive conference room fell silent as we entered. 12 senior leaders seated around. The polished table, expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness to careful neutrality. These were individuals who had worked closely with Marcus, who had operated within the culture he had helped shape, who now faced the uncertain prospect of new leadership with expanded authority. Victor made the introductions efficiently, emphasizing both my professional background and the board's confidence in my capacity to address Westridge's current challenges. I noted the subtle reactions, the slight stiffening from Sarah Winters, who had been Marcus's ally and Audrey's sister, the evaluative interest from Jackson Reed, head of domestic operations, the cautious optimism from Priya Sharma, chief risk officer who had reportedly clashed with Marcus over governance concerns. When Victor concluded the introductions, I addressed the group directly, establishing my approach from the outset. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," I began, my voice steady and authoritative. "I recognize that leadership transitions create uncertainty, particularly when accompanied by structural changes like the expansion of the CFO role to include operational oversight. Let me be direct about my priorities and expectations." I outlined my immediate focus areas: the Asia-Pacific remediation, governance enhancements through the security framework implementation, and restoration of market confidence through transparent communication about both challenges and solutions. I come to this role with respect for Westridge's strengths and clear-eyed recognition of its current vulnerabilities, I continued. My approach will be collaborative but decisive. I'll rely on your expertise in your respective domains while bringing a fresh perspective to our integrated operations. Throughout my remarks, I maintained direct eye contact with each leader, noting their reactions and establishing the expectation of engagement rather than passive reception. I've scheduled individual meetings with each of you over the next 3 days, I concluded. I want to understand your perspectives on our challenges and opportunities before making any significant structural decisions. My door is open, my expectations are high, and my commitment to Westridge's long-term success is absolute. As the meeting concluded and the executives dispersed, Jackson Reed remained behind, approaching with the confidence of someone accustomed to direct communication. "That was well handled," he said without preamble. "Coming in with authority, but not arrogance. Setting expectations without making premature judgments. Smart approach." "Thank you," I replied, appreciating the straightforward assessment. "Effective? Transitions require both decisiveness and discernment." "Agreed." He studied me with frank curiosity. "You know, there was speculation about how you'd approach this, whether your history with Marcus would color your leadership style or decisions." The directness was refreshing if potentially challenging. "My professional judgments are based on organizational needs and strategic imperatives, not personal history," I assured him. "The past informs my understanding of Westridge's culture, but doesn't dictate my approach to its future." Jackson nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. "Good to hear. For what it's worth, the operational teams are cautiously optimistic about your appointment. The security framework you developed impressed a lot of people. Practical but innovative, addressing real vulnerabilities without disrupting core functions. If you bring that same approach to your broader role, you'll find strong support." The endorsement, particularly from the head of domestic operations whose domain now partially fell under my expanded authority, was significant. "I appreciate that perspective. I'm looking forward to our individual meeting to discuss operational priorities in more detail." As Jackson departed, Victor reappeared with Lawrence Baxter, the board chairman's presence another signal of the importance placed on this transition. "Initial impressions?" Baxter asked as we moved toward what was now my office, the executive suite previously occupied by Marcus. "Engaged leadership with appropriate caution about new oversight," I replied. "Expected tensions between finance and operations, but also recognition of the need for integrated governance. Overall, a workable foundation." Baxter nodded approvingly at this assessment. The board anticipated resistance from certain quarters, particularly given the expanded scope of your role. Your approach seems calibrated to address those concerns, without compromising authority. "Authority is earned through demonstrated competence more than conferred by title," I observed. "Particularly when entering an established culture as an external leader." "Wisely put," Victor agreed as we reached the office suite, "though the board's explicit backing provides significant institutional support for your transition." The office itself was a statement of corporate power. Spacious with floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of the city, furnished with the restrained luxury appropriate to a C-suite position. It had been Marcus's domain, the physical manifestation of the success he had prioritized above all else, including our marriage. Now it was mine, not through marriage or adjacency, but through recognized capability and deliberate choice. The symmetry was impossible to ignore, though I maintained my focus on the professional rather than personal significance of the moment. "We've prepared briefing materials on immediate priorities," Baxter explained, indicating a portfolio on the desk. "The Asia-Pacific remediation plan requires your review and approval by Wednesday. The quarterly earnings announcement is scheduled for next week, obviously sensitive given recent developments. And the SEC has requested a meeting regarding the reporting discrepancies, which Victor will join you for on Thursday." The immediate immersion in consequential responsibilities was appropriate. This role offered no gradual onboarding or learning curve. The challenges that had precipitated Marcus's departure now demanded my immediate attention and decisive action. "I'll review the materials today and schedule time with the relevant teams," I assured him. "The earnings announcement will need particular attention given market sensitivities." As Baxter and Victor prepared to leave, allowing me to settle into the role, Baxter offered a final observation. "The board has complete confidence in your capacity to address these challenges, Elise. Your unique understanding of both Westridge's operations through the security framework and its culture through prior association provides valuable context that an entirely external candidate would lack. The diplomatic acknowledgement of my history with the organization, framing it as an asset rather than a complication, was appreciated. Thank you, Lawrence. I intend to validate that confidence through results rather than reassurances. Once alone in the office, I allowed myself a moment to absorb the significance of the transition. From Marcus Taylor's wife to Elise Montgomery, CFOO, in the same physical space but with fundamentally transformed authority and identity. The moment was interrupted by my executive assistant, Catherine, who had served in the same capacity for Marcus. Her expression was professionally neutral as she entered after a brief knock. Ms. Montgomery, I've prepared a schedule for your first week, incorporating the executive meetings you requested and the critical deadlines Mr. Baxter mentioned. Would you like to review it now? Her tone was courteous but guarded, understandably so, given her prior working relationship with Marcus and the uncertain dynamics of this transition. Yes, thank you, Catherine, I replied, matching her professional tone while establishing a distinct approach. And please call me Elise when we're working directly. I prefer more direct communication within my immediate team. A flicker of surprise crossed her features before she nodded. Of course. Elise. That's actually helpful to know. Mr. Taylor? Preferred more formal address at all times. The small detail revealed volumes about Marcus's leadership style. The emphasis on hierarchy, the maintenance of distance between himself and even his closest staff. My different approach would signal broader cultural shifts beyond just policy changes. We'll be working closely together, often under significant pressure, I explained. Formality can create unnecessary barriers to effective communication. That said, I understand you worked with Marcus for several years. This transition represents significant change for you as well. The acknowledgement of her perspective seemed to ease some tension in her posture. It does, she admitted. Though I appreciate your directness about expectations. It makes the adjustment more manageable. As we reviewed the schedule, I noted Catherine's exceptional organization and attention to detail, valuable qualities that transcended any specific executive's preferences. By the end of our discussion, her initial wariness had noticeably diminished, replaced by cautious engagement with the new working dynamic. The remainder of that first day was consumed by immersion in operational details, reviewing the Asia-Pacific remediation plan, analyzing preliminary earnings figures, and preparing for the individual meetings with executive team members scheduled throughout the week. The Asia-Pacific situation was particularly complex, revealing systemic governance failures beyond what had been publicly disclosed. The reporting discrepancies Marcus had concealed weren't isolated incidents, but symptoms of deeper structural problems in how international operations were managed and monitored. As I worked late into the evening, familiarizing myself with the full scope of the challenges, Catherine appeared in my doorway around 8:30 p.m. You should know that the security system logs executive floor access, she said. Several members of the board monitor those logs. Working until 9 p.m. your first day sends a particular message. The insight into unwritten monitoring practices was valuable, the kind of institutional knowledge that formal briefings wouldn't include. Thank you for that context. Though my schedule today is driven by substantive needs rather than impression management. Catherine's smile suggested appreciation for the response. Understood. Still, organizational cultures have their rhythms and observation patterns. Part of my role is ensuring you're aware of those unwritten dynamics. I value that perspective, I assured her, particularly during this transition period. Please, don't hesitate to share similar insights as they become relevant. As Catherine departed, I reflected on the layers of adaptation required by this new role, not just mastering the financial and operational challenges, but navigating the complex cultural currents of an organization where I had once been merely adjacent rather than integral. The following days brought a cascade of intensive meetings with executive team members, each revealing different dimensions of Westridge's current state and historical patterns. Sarah Winters remained the most guarded, her loyalty to Marcus evident in subtle defensiveness about decisions made under his leadership. Jackson Reed was bluntly pragmatic, focused on operational efficiencies rather than past governance failures. Priya Sharma proved an unexpected ally, sharing candid assessments of risk management weaknesses she had previously raised with limited success. Throughout these discussions, I maintained a consistent approach, focused on forward solutions rather than retrospective blame, emphasizing integrated governance rather than siloed authority, demonstrating both command of technical details and appreciation for institutional knowledge. By Thursday morning, when I met with Victor to prepare for our SEC discussion, I had developed a comprehensive understanding of both the specific Asia-Pacific reporting issues and the broader cultural factors that had enabled their concealment. "You've assimilated an impressive amount of information in a very short time," Victor observed as we reviewed our presentation for the regulators. "Your insights on the structural disconnects between financial reporting and operational metrics are particularly valuable." The security framework implementation provided a unique vantage point, I explained. It revealed patterns that wouldn't be visible from either finance or operations alone, but become clear when examining the interfaces between systems. Victor nodded thoughtfully, which is precisely why the board expanded the role to include operational oversight. The traditional separation between those functions created vulnerabilities that Marcus either didn't recognize or chose not to address. The implicit comparison wasn't lost on me, though I kept my response focused on the institutional rather than personal dimensions. Organizational structures often reflect historical priorities rather than current needs. The expanded CFOO role represents necessary evolution given today's integrated operational environments. Our meeting with the SEC later that day was challenging but ultimately productive. The regulators were appropriately skeptical about Westridge's remediation plans, probing for weaknesses and demanding specific timelines for implementation. However, our transparent acknowledgement of the governance failures and detailed corrective measures earned grudging respect, if not immediate trust. "Your candor about the underlying cultural factors is noteworthy," the lead examiner commented as our discussion concluded. "Most institutions in similar circumstances focus exclusively on technical fixes rather than addressing root causes. Technical solutions without cultural alignment create the illusion of remediation without its substance," I replied. "Westridge is committed to substantive reform, not merely regulatory compliance." As we departed the meeting, Victor expressed satisfaction with the outcome. "That went as well as could be expected given the circumstances. Your approach, neither defensive nor excessively apologetic, struck the right tone." "The facts warrant neither defensiveness nor apology from current leadership," I noted. "Our responsibility is remediation and reform, not justification of past decisions." The subtle distancing from Marcus's leadership went unremarked, but not unnoticed by Victor, whose slight nod acknowledged the distinction I had drawn. Friday brought the most significant early test of my leadership: the executive committee meeting where I would present my comprehensive assessment and initial action plan for addressing Westridge's governance challenges. The full executive team would be present, along with Lawrence Baxter representing the board. I prepared meticulously, ensuring my analysis was substantively sound while remaining sensitive to organizational dynamics. The presentation needed to establish clear authority without alienating key leaders whose cooperation would be essential for successful implementation. The meeting room was charged with anticipation as the executives gathered, conversations hushing as I entered with Baxter. The seating arrangement was subtly significant. I took position at the head of the table, with Victor and Baxter flanking me, a physical representation of institutional support for my leadership. "Thank you all for your engagement throughout this intensive first week," I began, acknowledging the demands the transition had placed on everyone present. Your candor in our individual discussions has been invaluable in shaping my understanding of both our challenges and capabilities. I proceeded to outline my assessment, direct but not accusatory, identifying structural weaknesses without assigning personal blame, acknowledging institutional strengths while highlighting necessary evolutionary changes. The Asia-Pacific situation is obviously our most immediate concern, I continued, moving to specific action items. But it's a symptom of broader governance disconnects rather than an isolated failure. Our remediation must address both the specific reporting, discrepancies, and the systemic factors that allowed them to develop and persist. The plan I presented was comprehensive but pragmatic, integrating financial controls with operational oversight, establishing clear accountability metrics that crossed traditional functional boundaries, implementing real-time monitoring protocols derived from the security framework. Throughout the presentation, I noted reactions. Sarah Winters's continued resistance evident in her crossed arms and tight expression. Jackson Reed's growing engagement as the operational benefits became clear. Priya Sharma's subtle nods of agreement with the enhanced risk management protocols. When I opened the floor for discussion, the questions were probing but constructive, focused on implementation challenges and resource requirements, rather than defending territory or challenging authority. Even Sarah eventually engaged substantively, raising legitimate concerns about integration timelines that I acknowledged and incorporated into the planning parameters. By the meeting's conclusion, there was cautious consensus on the path forward. Not universal enthusiasm, but functional alignment around priorities and methodologies. It was a significant first victory, establishing my leadership approach as both decisive and collaborative. As the executives departed, Baxter remained behind, his expression reflecting satisfaction with the outcome. "Very effectively handled," he observed once we were alone. "You've established clear direction without triggering defensive reactions that could undermine implementation. The board will be pleased with this progress." "It's preliminary alignment," I cautioned, never one to overstate early successes. "The real test will come as we move from planning to implementation, particularly when difficult resource allocation decisions are required." "True," Baxter acknowledged, "but you've laid a solid foundation in remarkably short order. The contrast with previous leadership approaches is noteworthy." Again, the implicit comparison to Marcus remained diplomatic but clear. "Different challenges require different leadership styles," I replied, maintaining professional focus rather than personal satisfaction at the favorable comparison. The following week brought the next significant hurdle, the quarterly earnings announcement, the first under my leadership and a critical moment for market perception of Westridge's stability and future prospects. The financial results themselves were complex. Overall performance below analyst expectations due to the Asia-Pacific issues, but with stronger domestic operations partially offsetting international weaknesses. The narrative required careful calibration, acknowledging the serious governance failures while establishing credible pathways to recovery. I worked closely with the investor relations team on both the announcement itself and the subsequent analyst call strategy. My approach emphasized transparent disclosure of the full scope of the Asia-Pacific situation while providing specific remediation milestones and governance enhancements that were already underway. We need to be forthright about the challenges while ensuring investors understand that the leadership and oversight mechanisms addressing those challenges are fundamentally different from those that allowed them to develop, I explained to the IR team as we finalized the presentation. The morning of the announcement, I received an unexpected message from Marcus, the first direct communication since his brief congratulatory text following my appointment. "The analysts will focus on forward guidance more than historical explanation. They can accept past failures if future direction is clear and credible. You understand this better than I did. Good luck today." The advice was sound, the acknowledgement of my superior understanding in this domain, a striking evolution from the man who had once dismissed my financial acumen. I didn't respond directly, though the insight informed my final preparations for the analyst call. The announcement was received with cautious optimism, the stock remaining stable despite the disappointing numbers, analysts noting the transparent approach to governance failures and credible remediation framework in their initial commentaries. The call itself was challenging but ultimately successful. I addressed difficult questions directly, neither minimizing the seriousness of the reporting discrepancies nor allowing them to overshadow Westridge's fundamental operational strengths. By the call's conclusion, the initial market response had shifted from neutral to positive, with Westridge stock gaining 3% as investors processed the comprehensive governance reforms already underway. "Masterfully handled," Victor commented as we concluded the post-call debrief. "You struck precisely the right balance between accountability for past issues and confidence in future direction. The market's response confirms that approach." The successful navigation of these early challenges, the SEC meeting, the executive, alignment, the earnings announcement, established my leadership credibility beyond initial institutional support. I was proving effective not just because the board had granted authority, but because I was exercising that authority with demonstrable competence and strategic clarity. As the weeks progressed, my integration of financial and operational oversight began yielding tangible benefits. The remediation of Asia-Pacific issues accelerated under the integrated approach, with clear accountability metrics preventing the diffusion of responsibility that had allowed problems to persist previously. Domestic operations became more financially disciplined as operational leaders gained deeper understanding of economic drivers through the cross-functional structures I had implemented. Perhaps most significantly, the security framework, now fully implemented across all divisions, was providing early detection of potential governance issues before they could develop into material problems. 3 months into my tenure, when the framework flagged unusual transaction patterns in the European division, we were able to identify and address procedural weaknesses before they impacted financial reporting or regulatory compliance. The system worked exactly as designed. Priya Sharma noted during our review of the European situation. Early detection, cross-functional analysis, and preemptive intervention. It's a stark contrast to how similar issues would have been handled previously. The unspoken comparison to Marcus's approach, compartmentalized, reactive, often focused, on appearance over substance, hung in the air between us. "It's how governance should function," I replied simply. "Transparent, integrated, and preventative rather than reactive." By the 6-month mark of my tenure, Westridge had successfully completed the Asia-Pacific remediation, restored market confidence through 2 consecutive solid quarterly reports, and established new governance standards that were beginning to attract positive attention from regulators and industry analysts alike. A prominent financial publication featured a detailed analysis of Westridge's governance transformation, directly attributing the successful turnaround to the integrated oversight model pioneered by Montgomery, and noting that the approach was being studied by other financial institutions facing similar challenges in an increasingly complex regulatory environment. The external validation was professionally gratifying, but secondary to the internal transformation I observed daily, cross-functional teams collaborating effectively, transparent reporting becoming cultural norm rather than compliance burden, preventative governance replacing crisis management as the operational standard. Victor Chen marked this milestone with an invitation to dinner. Not at the formal restaurant where Marcus and I had first met him years ago, but at a smaller, more contemporary venue known for innovative cuisine and relaxed atmosphere. 6 months ago, the board was hoping for stabilization and remediation, Victor noted as we settled at our table. "You've delivered transformation and innovation. It's an impressive achievement by any standard, particularly given the challenges you inherited." "The foundation was stronger than the recent failures suggested," I replied, acknowledging the institutional strengths that had enabled such rapid reform. Westridge needed recalibration more than reinvention, aligning governance systems with operational realities and establishing accountability across traditional functional boundaries. Victor smiled at this characteristically measured response. Always careful to distribute credit broadly, rather than claim it personally. A leadership quality Marcus never quite mastered. The direct comparison, the first time Victor had explicitly contrasted our leadership approaches, surprised me. Different strengths for different challenges, I offered diplomatically. Perhaps, Victor conceded, though results speak for themselves. Which brings me to the purpose of this dinner. He paused as the server delivered our drinks, then continued once we were alone again. The board has been discussing Westridge's longer-term leadership structure. As you know, I've been planning my transition to retirement for some time. Recent events delayed those plans, but the successful stabilization under your leadership has reopened the succession discussion. The direction of the conversation became suddenly clear. Victor was approaching the CEO succession question with implications for my own role and future at Westridge. Your performance as CFOO has placed you on the short list for consideration, he continued, confirming my assessment. Your integrated approach to governance and operations aligns with the board's vision for Westridge's future, and your success in navigating complex challenges has demonstrated the required leadership capabilities. The possibility, from discarded wife to potential CEO of the organization Marcus had once dominated, represented the ultimate full-circle journey. Yet my reaction was measured rather than triumphant, focused on organizational fit rather than personal narrative. I appreciate the board's confidence, I replied carefully, though such a transition would involve significant considerations beyond individual performance metrics. Victor nodded, understanding the subtext of my response. You're thinking about how your history with the organization might complicate such an appointment, whether externally in market perception or internally in organizational dynamics. Among other factors, I acknowledged. Effectiveness at the CEO level requires both capability and contextual alignment. The history creates complexities that merit careful consideration. The board has discussed those complexities extensively, Victor assured me. Their conclusion is that your demonstrated leadership capabilities outweigh any potential complications from historical associations. The transformation you've led in 6 months speaks more powerfully than any past connections. His endorsement was meaningful, particularly given his long-standing mentorship of Marcus. I'm honored by the board's assessment, I said sincerely, though I assume this is the beginning of a longer conversation rather than an immediate decision. Point. Indeed, Victor confirmed. The succession planning process will unfold over the next several months. I wanted to ensure you understood your position within that process before broader discussions begin. As our dinner continued, the conversation shifted to more general topics: industry trends, regulatory developments, Westridge's strategic positioning in evolving markets. Yet the CEO succession question remained present beneath the surface, representing both professional opportunity and personal milestone. Later that evening, as I returned to my apartment and considered the implications of Victor's disclosure, I received a message from Elena. Heard interesting rumors about succession planning at Westridge. Victor dining with rising stars these days? Her network's efficiency remained impressive. Information still travels fast in financial circles, I replied, neither confirming nor denying her implied question. Some journeys are too symbolically perfect not to complete, she countered. From discarded wife to CEO would make even Shakespeare envious of the narrative arc. Her framing echoed my own earlier reflection, though I maintained professional perspective in my response. Leadership decisions should be based on capability and organizational needs, not narrative satisfaction. Of course, Elena agreed. But when capability, organizational needs, and narrative satisfaction align, That's rare perfection. I smiled at her persistent focus on the personal storyline, but didn't continue the exchange. The potential CEO succession represented professional opportunity to be evaluated on its merits, not personal vindication to be savored for its symmetry. The following day, as I was reviewing quarterly projections in my office, Catherine appeared with an unexpected update. "Marcus Taylor has requested a meeting," she said, her tone carefully neutral given the sensitivity of the relationship. "He didn't specify the purpose, only that it relates to the European operations review currently underway." The request was surprising. Marcus had maintained professional distance since his departure, our only direct communications being the brief congratulatory text after my appointment and his message before the earnings call. Did he indicate urgency or preferred timing? He said it could be scheduled at your convenience, but suggested it would be beneficial before the European review concludes next week. I considered the request carefully. Any meeting with Marcus carried both professional and personal complexities, yet his knowledge of European operations could potentially provide valuable context for the ongoing review. "Schedule it for Thursday afternoon," I decided. "And Catherine, please ensure Victor is aware of the meeting. Not for approval, but for appropriate transparency given the circumstances." Catherine nodded, understanding both the decision and its careful governance considerations. "Of course." Thursday arrived with a sense of subtle significance. The first formal meeting between Marcus and me since he had visited my apartment the night before my appointment was announced. The professional dynamics had shifted dramatically since then, with my successful leadership now established and his legacy being redefined through the governance reforms I had implemented. I arranged for the meeting to take place in a conference room rather than my office, a neutral space that avoided the symbolic weight of him returning to the office that had once been his and was now mine. Marcus arrived precisely on time, dressed in business attire but without the pristine perfection that had once been his hallmark. Success had always looked effortless on him. Adjustment to change had brought a more human dimension to his appearance. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said as we settled at the conference table. "I appreciate that this could be perceived as unusual given our history and the circumstances of my departure." "Professional expertise transcends personal history," I replied, establishing the meeting's parameters from the outset. "If you have insights relevant to the European review, I'm interested in hearing them." Marcus nodded, accepting this framing. "I do. During my tenure, the European division operated under unique structural arrangements following the merger with Albrecht Financial. Those arrangements created reporting complexities that aren't immediately evident in standard reviews." He proceeded to outline specific governance anomalies within the European operations, not misconduct or deliberate misrepresentation as had occurred in Asia-Pacific, but structural inefficiencies and potential blind spots that could affect the review's effectiveness. His analysis was precise, insightful, and clearly motivated by institutional rather than personal considerations. Despite our complex history, Marcus genuinely cared about Westridge's success and was offering information that could prevent potential future issues. "This context is valuable," I acknowledged when he had concluded. "The review team has identified some of these structural anomalies, but your historical perspective adds important dimension to the analysis." "I'm glad it's useful," Marcus replied, a flicker of professional satisfaction crossing his features. "Westridge's stability matters to me, regardless of my current relationship with the organization." There was sincerity in his statement that would have been unimaginable during our marriage, when personal ambition had often overshadowed institutional commitment. The experience of failure and professional reevaluation had evidently prompted significant reflection. "Your insights will help ensure the review addresses structural factors rather than merely procedural compliance," I assured him. "I appreciate you bringing this context forward." As we concluded the substantive discussion and prepared to end the meeting, Marcus hesitated, seemingly considering whether to address the larger context of our professional intersection. "I've been following Westridge's performance," he said finally. "The governance reforms you've implemented, particularly the integrated oversight model between finance and operations, they're impressive. They address vulnerabilities I should have recognized but didn't." The acknowledgement was unexpected. A professional validation I had never sought from him, but found meaningful nonetheless. "Different leadership perspectives reveal different institutional needs," I replied, neither seeking nor rejecting the implied comparison. "True," Marcus nodded. "Though some perspectives prove more effective than others, the results under your leadership speak for themselves." He paused, then added with surprising candor, "I've heard the succession discussions have begun. For what it's worth, I believe you would excel in that role. Your understanding of Westridge's culture combined with your governance vision represents exactly what the organization needs moving forward." His endorsement, unsolicited and apparently genuine, represented the culmination of a remarkable evolution in our relationship. From husband who had dismissed my professional capabilities to failed predecessor acknowledging my superior leadership approach, the transformation was as significant as my own journey from discarded wife to potential CEO. "Thank you," I said, simply, neither overvaluing nor dismissing his assessment. As Marcus prepared to leave, he offered one final observation. "When I left our marriage, I thought I was moving toward greater success while leaving you with nothing but debt. It's perhaps the most significant miscalculation of my life. You've built something more substantial than I managed in my entire career, while I've had to reconsider everything I thought defined success." The personal acknowledgement hung in the air between us, not an apology exactly, but a recognition of the profound misjudgment that had shaped both our trajectories. "Life rarely follows expected paths," I replied after a moment. "For either of us." As he departed, I remained in the conference room, reflecting on the strange symmetry of our intersection, how his act of abandonment had ultimately led to my professional reclamation, how my success had prompted his reevaluation, how we had both been transformed by the same pivotal moment, but in entirely different directions. The following weeks brought acceleration in both the European operations review, strengthened by Marcus's contextual insights, and the CEO succession planning process. The latter remained confidential but increasingly concrete, with structured interviews and strategic vision presentations to the board's succession committee. Throughout this period, I maintained focused leadership of current operations while developing a comprehensive plan for Westridge's future direction, emphasizing integrated governance, sustainable growth, and cultural transformation that would institutionalize the reforms begun under my CFOO leadership. 6 weeks after my meeting with Marcus, Lawrence Baxter requested a private meeting at the University Club, the same venue where we had first discussed the governance issues that had ultimately led to Marcus's departure and my appointment. "The board has completed its succession evaluation process," he explained once we were settled in the same private dining alcove where our professional relationship had begun. "The decision was unanimous. We would like you to succeed Victor as CEO of Westridge, effective at the next quarterly board meeting." Though the possibility had been developing for months, the formal offer still carried significant weight. Professional validation at the highest level, completion of a journey that had begun in the devastation of personal betrayal and financial abandonment. "I'm honored by the board's confidence," I replied, neither overplaying nor understating the significance of the moment. "I believe in Westridge's potential and the governance foundation we've established over the past 9 months. Your leadership has transformed not just our operations, but our culture," Baxter said with evident sincerity. "The integrated oversight model you developed as CFOO has become a template for governance reforms across the industry. As CEO, you'll have the platform to expand that vision across all aspects of our operations." We discussed practical transition details, timing, public announcement plans, executive restructuring to address the vacancy my promotion would create. Throughout, I maintained professional focus rather than personal triumph, treating this milestone as the beginning of new responsibilities rather than the culmination of a personal journey. As our meeting concluded, Baxter offered a final observation. When we first discussed the governance issues 9 months ago, I saw someone with exceptional capability constrained by circumstantial limitations. What's remarkable isn't just your professional ascension, but how completely you've transcended those constraints to redefine both yourself and this organization. The validation wasn't just of my professional capabilities, but of the personal transformation that had enabled their full expression. From subordinating my ambitions to Marcus's priorities to establishing independent leadership that had fundamentally reshaped an organization he had once dominated. Constraints often reveal capabilities that comfort conceals, I replied. I'm grateful for the opportunity to apply those capabilities in service of Westridge's future. The CEO appointment was announced the following week, generating extensive financial press coverage that emphasized both the governance transformation I had led as CFOO and the strategic vision I represented for Westridge's future. While some articles inevitably noted the personal narrative, from ex-wife to CEO, Montgomery's remarkable ascension at Westridge, most focused on the substantive leadership qualities and organizational reforms that had earned market confidence and board support. Industry reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with analysts noting that my appointment represented continuity of the successful governance reforms while signaling commitment to further innovation. Westridge stock rose 7% on the announcement, reflecting market confidence in both current performance and future direction. The morning the appointment became public, I received messages from across my professional network, colleagues from Horizon and Morgan Stanley, financial industry peers, former classmates from Wharton. Each represented a thread in the professional fabric I had carefully rewoven since the divorce, connections that had sustained and supported my journey of reclamation. Elena's message was characteristically direct. From nothing but debt to CEO in 2 years. The most elegant professional revenge ever executed. Congratulations on completing the perfect narrative arc. I smiled at her persistent framing, but replied with my own perspective. Not revenge. Reclamation and reformation. Building something new rather than avenging something lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't. Want to pass these up? Just click and check them out.